Good afternoon. Well, back to our top story. Confirmation in the last 24 hours that the British government has ordered the company Bain & Co., the consultancy, can no longer tender for British government work for the next 3 years because of what it did to SARS here. During the state capture era, Bain helped to weaken SARS deliberately. It emerged during the Zondo Commission and other hearings that the firm's South African partner, Vittorio Massone, had been meeting with former President Jacob Zuma about SARS long before Zuma appointed Tom Moyane to the position as SARS Commissioner. In the end, Bain repaid the money it had been paid by SARS. The person who campaigned in Britain for the British government to punish Bain in this way is Lord Peter Hain, a long-time anti-apartheid campaigner after growing up here, then became a British cabinet minister for the Labour Party before going to the House of Lords in that country. He joins us now. Lord Hain, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. You've been campaigning for this in the UK. Now the British government has finally agreed to act against Bain. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm really pleased. It took me a bit by surprise, frankly, but the persistent pressure paid off and I was able to convince Jacob Rees-Mogg, the cabinet minister responsible, to institute this ban. Athol Williams, the brave Bain whistleblower who'd worked for the company for a quarter of a century, along with me when we met him a few weeks ago to provide additional evidence.
Do you think 3 years is long enough?
Oh, yes, I do. I think it's a start. The most important thing is I'm not aware of any government having done this before. And it'll set a precedent, enable other anti-corruption campaigns to be better positioned because of this precedent. And I think also it will put the fear up a lot of global corporates who've been able to get away with all sorts of things in African countries, especially under President Zuma, former President Zuma and the Gupta brothers in South Africa. When it was a South African issue and it was confined to the media space in the country and to political argument in South Africa. But when it starts getting towards London and towards Washington, D.C., and of course Bain is a headquartered, originated company in Boston in the USA, then they start to feel the heat. And it's really important that that happens because otherwise these companies will engage in this kind of nefarious practice again, either in South Africa or somewhere else.
You make such an important point. I'm not aware of this being done either, a company being banned from doing business with the government of one country for what they did in another country. McKinsey, of course, did pretty much the same thing, not at SARS, but at Eskom. They also paid the money back. One wonders if maybe it's time for a little bit of pressure on a couple of governments over McKinsey.
Well, maybe, and KPMG would tick that box as well, and SAP, and then, of course, the banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered and Bank of Baroda, which billions of rands, the money out of South Africa to be hidden abroad or moved around through various shell companies, front companies, with the Guptas, the real owners, being hidden from scrutiny. So, yeah, I think there could be other candidates, but what singled Bain out and why I focused on it and persuaded the British government to do this, and I think it was important evidence for them, is that the Zondo Commission was absolutely condemnatory and coruscating about Bain, saying that it had acted unlawfully, that it referred it for possible prosecution, not just over the SARS scandal, but its other work right across the state-owned enterprise sector, because they did about a 2 billion rand of work during the Zuma decade for different state-owned enterprises like Eskom, for example. So I'm not aware of Zondo doing that to any of the other corporates who were implicated in the state capture scandal. So I think that's what singled Bain out. But it will serve as a warning to all of them, because the thing that people often miss, and why I've focused on this in the last few years, because of the international global dimension that I could maybe help do something about, is that, yes, there were corrupt politicians, and it went right to the top of the presidency under the Zuma decade. And yes, there were corrupt business people, the Gupta brothers and others. But you needed businesses it took two to tango. It took the businesses who were, in Bain's case, doing consultancies. Instead of improving the efficiency of the revenue service, they actually immobilized it, helped immobilize it under the direct orders of Zuma, and they met him, I think, 17 or 18 times privately. This is without precedent, to use the term again. It's those global corporates in the main that were complicit in this whole terrible episode of prodigious looting that has damaged South Africa so horribly in so many ways and left this legacy. And the focus should be on them, not just on the corrupt politicians. Of course, they should be first in line and they should be prosecuted and any of their successors deterred from doing anything like that again. But equally, the Bains and the KPMGs and the McKinseys and the banks should be deterred as well, and I think will be even more so, because the story made the front page of the Financial Times in London, and it's a global newspaper, as you know, Stephen. So that means it's going to be read right across the world. And when, as I said, when it was a South African story, a scandal alone, then these global corporates think, oh, well, it's not going to affect business in Britain. Well, it has affected business in Britain for Bain, and it's made a huge reputational, it's delivered a huge reputational blow to them, and they're feeling the pain, and quite right too, and the rest of them should too.
So far, Bain and Co., as far as I know, hasn't actually been punished here. They were forced to leave business leadership South Africa, but I think they're still operating. They're getting contracts, probably with government. I mean, should our government do the same thing, follow the British example?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the government of South Africa and every level of the public sector in South Africa should have been the first in the queue, should have been setting a precedent, and then South Africa's ambassadors around the world and its foreign minister and other cabinet ministers should have been urging the same from other governments. I think there's been, put it politely, a certain sclerosis in the South African government when it comes to this. The president has said that he wants to root out corruption and has certainly done a bit of that, but there's far too much of it still. There's still cabinet ministers who are indulging in it, and all the way down the levels. But anyway, I think South Africa, to answer your question directly, should have been doing this now, and I understand business is booming for Bain in South Africa. I'm not sure how much of it is in the public sector, but generally it is, and yet it has profited massively from the state capture scandal, as have other companies. And they've got to realize that if they do this kind of thing, there will be consequences, not just campaigners like me banging on about it, as I've done now for a number of years in the House of Lords, but equally, in this case, the British government taking action. And I think it's created an enormous stir, not just for Bain, but for all other companies bidding for contracts, that if you act unlawfully, to use Zondo's phrase, the Zondo Commission's phrase, and you are referred for prosecution, then you should, you'll feel the pain, and quite right too.
There's another issue to this. So we've been talking about the company Bain and Co. There are individuals involved as well. I mean, the person who represented Bain and Co., their South African partner, Vittorio Massone, I don't think he works for Bain anymore, but he runs, I think, a digital marketing business in Italy. It may even be Milan. It doesn't seem that he's had any punishment for this. Athol Williams, I think, said today that the people involved with Bain in South Africa who did this are still in the Bain system. There's a sort of accountability for individuals, too. I mean, what Vittorio Massone was doing, I mean, I'm going to be so careful with my words here, was completely immoral.
Well, I do think the point you're making is a really telling one, that when companies are found out in this way, sometimes they receive a fine, sometimes really, frankly, they're prosecuted. Doesn't happen very often. But there should be a change in the regulations, which means that if you are a bank manager, let's say, in HSBC or Bank of Baroda or Standard Chartered, the three principal conduits for the Zupta billions to be money laundered abroad, and you were waving it through when you must have known that it was suspicious for one reason or another, then you should you should be sanctioned yourself personally, not just the bank in this instance, or in the case of Bain, not just the company stopped from doing public contracts, but the individual global partners whom Athol Williams has pointed out are still in working in the system, some of them in London, and they were named to the British government when I was pressing them to say, look, these guys were involved in the South African state capture episode on behalf of Bain. They're working in London as well. Bain's global partners are exactly that. They move around the world doing different work. Most of it, I guess, legitimate. But in this instance, definitely not. They should feel the heat. So it's not just a corporate issue, it becomes a personal issue that you could be disbarred from working in that sector and if you're found to have committed that kind of. There needs to be a change in the manager's regime so that there's personal culpability. That was part of the evidence I gave to the Zondo Commission in November 2019. Just to say that there needs to be a change in the regulations and the rules globally to make individual managers, in Bain's case partners, personally responsible when something has gone so badly wrong as it did in this instance. And in the South African Revenue's cases, it was a deliberate policy by Bain to immobilize the agency. That's what President Zuma asked them to do. Whereas they should have been using their management consultancy skills to improve its efficiency. They did the very opposite.
Lord Peter Hain, thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate the time. Veteran anti-apartheid campaigner, the person campaigning for there to be accountability, punishment for Bain and Co., which is still operating here.